New Zealand's housing market has pushed thousands of families to the margins. Whānau are sleeping in emergency motels, waiting on lists that stretch for years, while the cost of basic shelter continues to outpace wages. When these communities ask for relief, the political response is remarkably consistent. Lawmakers cite cost pressures and economic constraints, telling the public that housing justice requires gradualism and endless patience. But the people preaching that patience operate inside a completely different economic ecosystem. They mandate sacrifice for the public, while living entirely insulated from the financial consequences of their own housing policies. Labour leader Chris Hipkins has publicly argued that too much capital in New Zealand is locked up in housing speculation. He has stated that savings need to be redirected toward more productive investments rather than property. But a New Zealand Herald investigation revealed his own private retirement vehicle owns his family's coastal holiday home in Raumati. Hipkins confirmed he uses a taxpayer-subsidized private superannuation scheme to service the mortgage on that property. When pressed on whether this setup contradicts his warnings about housing capital, he reframed the scrutiny. He defended the arrangement by saying, "Ultimately, it's my money, it's my retirement savings, so I am investing for retirement savings." By framing the subsidy as his money, the public contribution is repositioned as a personal entitlement. This rhetoric focuses on the legality of the private investment, effectively removing the ethical question of the subsidy's source from the conversation. This incident reveals the governing doctrine of a political class that uses parliamentary devices to extract from the commons and privatize the benefit. To understand how this works, you have to look at the official architecture of parliamentary privilege. The Remuneration Authority dictates a formal package of statutory entitlements for MPs, including specific superannuation rights. For every dollar an MP contributes, the taxpayer adds $2.50. This subsidy caps at $32,600 per year. These funds flow into private trusts, like the one holding Hipkins' Raumati holiday home, explicitly named after the street it sits on. Parliament has sanctioned this structure to legally hold and service residential mortgages, creating a pathway to property ownership that ordinary workers can never replicate. The very people tasked with solving housing inequality have engineered a system that operates as a publicly funded wealth escalator for themselves. This culture of insulation crosses the political aisle. Current Speaker of the House, Gerry Brownlee, has operated inside this exact machinery of entitlement for decades. Reporting revealed that Brownlee incorrectly and incompletely declared his property ownership to Parliament for 20 years. He simply issued a correction after a journalist found the discrepancy, facing no formal investigation. When scrutiny threatens the parliamentary class, the institutional instinct is protective. They close the gates, manage access, and frame the reporter as the problem. Similar private superannuation schemes owning residential property have been declared by members across the political spectrum, proving this is a system with widespread bipartisan uptake. Labour and National differ in their public rhetoric and the specific communities they flatter on the campaign trail. But when their own self-preservation is on the table, both parties share a remarkable talent for protecting the arrangement. They defend the Trough by draping it in respectable language. Words like entitlement, registered scheme, and accommodation service act as a sedative, turning moral extraction into an administrative process. When self-preservation is on the table, red and blue hands feed from the same trough with identical contempt for the struggling public. Politicians reliably defend these setups by stating they are operating within the rules. That defense is technically accurate and ethically bankrupt, completely failing the higher standard of tikanga. True leadership in tikanga is defined through mana kitanga. A kaitiaki prioritizes putting food on the table for others before attending to their own needs. Leadership is measured by what you surrender so others can live with dignity, not by what you can legally extract. In a cultural context, Wenua represents shelter, continuity, and wakapapa. This framework views housing as a matter of communal obligation, standing in stark contrast to the way parliamentary schemes treat land as a wealth escalator for the elite. When lawmakers treat housing as an exclusive financial perk before treating it as a human right, it destroys public trust. The anger comes from a massive experiential gap. Politicians visit precarity as a talking point, while struggling families endure it as their daily reality. A parliament saturated with personal property interests and insulated by public money loses the moral authority to regulate housing fairly for the rest of the country. To dismantle this privilege, 1. Ban MPs from directing taxpayer-subsidized superannuation into private property. 2. Require automatic disclosure of MP property claims. 3. Implement binding conflict of interest rules. 4. Force parties to justify their superior housing arrangements. Finally, end legality as a substitute for morality. Urgent, direct political parties will never volunteer to expose their own perks. Funding independent accountability allows the public to uncover the structural faults in the system and demand reform themselves. Legality is merely the floor of public service. True ethics and real accountability must always sit above it.